The night was thick with rain, each droplet drumming against the cobblestones as Isabella hurried along the narrow street, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. It had been a long day at the school where she taught, and all she wanted was the warmth of her modest home and the comfort of a hot cup of tea. The storm made the world feel deserted. Shopkeepers had shuttered their doors early, and the usual laughter of children echoing from the courtyards was replaced by the sound of wind whistling through alleys. As she passed by a dimly lit corner near the market, a faint sound made her pause, a harsh rattling cough followed by a weak whimper. Isabella froze. In the shadows of the alley, she could barely make out a small figure curled against the wall. Her heart quickened. For a moment, she hesitated. Most people would have walked away, not wanting to get involved. But Isabella was not most people. "Hello?" she called softly, her voice nearly drowned by the rain. No answer came, only another fit of coughing. Her instincts urged her forward. As she knelt down, the faint light revealed a little boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, trembling and drenched to the bone. His cheeks burned with fever, his breath shallow and uneven. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. His small hands clutched a toy car, the only sign of comfort he carried with him. His eyelids fluttered open just enough for her to catch the glossy sheen of fever in his eyes. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak murmur before his body sagged against her. Isabella's heart clenched. She couldn't leave him here. Not in this storm, not in this condition. Without thinking twice, she slipped her arms under his frail frame and lifted him into her embrace. He was light, frighteningly so, his body limp with exhaustion. She could feel the heat radiating from him, his fever burning hot against her chest. The rain pelted harder as she struggled back toward her house, her skirts dragging through puddles. Every step she took was a battle against the storm, but her determination didn't waver. The boy whimpered once, his voice broken, and instinctively she whispered, "Shh, it's all right. I've got you now. You're safe." By the time Isabella reached her doorstep, her arms ached, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She pushed the door open with her shoulder and carried him inside, where the warmth of her small home wrapped around them. Setting him gently on the sofa, she quickly fetched blankets, a basin of cool water, and her small collection of herbs. She worked through the night, tending to him as if he were her own child. Each time he stirred, she soothed him, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead and whispering reassurances. Though she had no idea who he was or where he had come from, one truth anchored her. She could not and would not abandon this child. What Isabella didn't know was that this single act of kindness, this choice to lift a sick, trembling boy into her arms, was the moment her life's course would shift forever. The storm raged on outside, but within Isabella's modest home, a fragile calm lingered. The boy lay on her sofa, his chest rising and falling unevenly as Isabella worked tirelessly by his side. She brewed a concoction of chamomile and ginger, herbs she often used when her students at the school fell ill, and coaxed a few sips past his parched lips. He whimpered weakly, but the warmth seemed to ease his shivers. Throughout the night, Isabella never once let herself rest. She sat at his side, dabbing his burning forehead with cool water, whispering soft words of comfort, as though her voice alone could anchor him back to health. "You'll be all right," she murmured. "Just hold on." By the flickering glow of the oil lamp, she studied his face more closely. There was something about him that felt unusual. His features, though softened by fever, carried a striking refinement. Sharp cheekbones, dark lashes, and a certain air of privilege. His clothes, though muddied and torn, were made from fine fabric, the kind she had only ever seen on the wealthy patrons who occasionally passed through the market. Around his neck, she noticed a small chain tucked beneath his collar. When she shifted it into view, her breath caught. It wasn't an ordinary pendant. It bore an insignia, an emblem she had glimpsed before in whispered conversations and fleeting symbols carved discreetly on walls. The crest belonged to none other than the notorious De Luca family, the ruling mafia syndicate of the city. Isabella's stomach twisted. This was no ordinary child. This boy belonged to the most feared and powerful man in the underworld. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket tighter around him. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious. Harboring someone tied to the mafia, especially the son of their boss, was dangerous. If discovered, she could be accused of kidnapping or meddling in matters that were far beyond her quiet, simple life. And yet, as she looked at the fragile boy, so vulnerable and feverish, her heart refused to turn cold. He was just a child, sick and frightened. Whatever power or menace his father held, none of it belonged to him. Sometime near dawn, the boy stirred. His fever had eased slightly, though his skin was still clammy. His small hand reached out blindly, finding hers. Isabella froze, then gently enclosed his fingers in her own. "Mama?" he whispered weakly, confusion lacing his voice. Isabella's chest tightened. "No, sweetheart." "I'm Isabella. You're safe now." He fell back into sleep, but those words lingered with her long after his breathing settled. Whoever this child was, he was yearning for comfort, for safety, and fate had placed him in her arms. As the first pale rays of morning seeped through the window, Isabella realized two things. First, she could not undo what she had already done. She had chosen to save him. And second, this boy's presence would inevitably draw attention. The DeLuca family would not rest until they found their missing heir. And when they did, Isabella's world would no longer be the same. Morning light spilled across the city, but with it came a tension that spread through its streets like wildfire. The DeLuca estate, usually shrouded in disciplined silence and shadowy power, was in uproar. Guards scrambled, men barked orders, and the atmosphere crackled with urgency. The reason was simple. The boss's only son, Matteo DeLuca, had vanished. Luciano DeLuca, the mafia boss feared across the city, stood in the grand hall, his towering presence radiating barely restrained fury. His dark eyes burned with a mixture of rage and something even sharper, fear. For all his ruthlessness, Matteo was his only weakness. The boy who softened the hardened edges of a man built on power and blood. The news that the child had been lost in the storm the night before was unacceptable. "Find him," Luciano growled, his voice low but lethal. "Search every alley, every house, every corner of this city. Whoever has my son, whether by chance or design, will pay dearly." His men scattered, their loyalty fueled by both fear of their leader and a genuine devotion to the child who was adored within the syndicate. The streets buzzed with movement. Questions were asked in hushed tones. Doors were knocked upon with an authority no one dared refuse. The mafia's reach extended into every corner, and soon the city was trembling under the weight of their hunt. Meanwhile, Isabella remained in her small home, oblivious to the storm that was already closing in around her. Matteo slept more peacefully now, his fever breaking, though he was still weak. Isabella sat by his side, relief softening her exhaustion. She wondered about his family, about what kind of father let his son be out in such a storm alone. The pendant's insignia had told her enough. He was important, but the depth of that importance was still beyond her understanding. As the hours passed, a sense of unease began to gnaw at her. The streets outside seemed louder than usual, filled with heavy footsteps and clipped voices. Peering from her window, Isabella saw groups of men she didn't recognize moving with precision and purpose. They weren't townsfolk. There was something dangerous in their bearing, something that spoke of violence kept just beneath the surface. Her heart raced. Were they searching for Matteo already? If they found him here, what would they think? That she had kidnapped him? That she had dared interfere with their world? Panic threatened to overtake her, but one glance at the boy's fragile form steeled her resolve. Whatever happened, she would protect him until she was sure he was safe. By late afternoon, the whispers reached her door. A neighbor hurried to her, eyes wide with fear. "Isabella," she hissed, "they say the DeLuca boy is missing. The mafia is searching every home. People are terrified. If they find him here—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the weight of her warning hung heavy in the air. Isabella's blood ran cold. The truth she had barely allowed herself to consider was undeniable now. The boy in her arms wasn't just lost. He was the son of the most dangerous man in the city. And soon, that man's wrath would lead him straight to her door. By nightfall, the storm had passed, but the tension in the air was heavier than any rainfall. Isabella's heart beat like a drum as the noise of vehicles and heavy boots echoed closer to her quiet street. Her neighbors had long since shut their doors and windows, retreating into silence as though hiding could make the danger pass them by. Isabella, however, had no such luxury. The sick child asleep on her sofa was the very reason. Danger was about to come crashing into her home. She had just finished cooling Mateo's forehead with a damp cloth when the unmistakable sound of engines growled outside. Black cars, sleek and intimidating, rolled to a stop, their presence suffocating the little street. Men in dark suits spilled out, scanning the area with sharp, predatory eyes. Isabella froze, her hand lingering on Mateo's tiny hand. It was happening. Then he arrived. Luciano De Luca stepped out of the largest car, his mere presence commanding absolute silence. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated a power that made the air itself seem to bend around him. His face was chiseled with severity, but his eyes, dark and piercing, were aflame with urgency and fear. This was not just the face of a mafia boss. This was the face of a father on the edge of breaking. Isabella's door rattled with a sudden knock. No, not a knock, but a demand. She flinched, her breath caught in her throat. For a fleeting second she considered hiding, but the futility of such an idea was obvious. With trembling hands she opened the door. There he stood. Luciano De Luca, flanked by two of his men, stared down at her with an intensity that rooted her in place. "Have you seen a boy?" His voice was rough, dangerous, yet threaded with desperation. Isabella's lips parted, but no sound came. Her eyes flicked involuntarily to the sofa behind her, where Mateo stirred faintly. It was all the answer he needed. In 2 strides, Luciano was past her, his gaze locking onto the small figure on the couch. "Mateo!" The name broke from his throat, raw and unrestrained. He rushed to the boy's side, kneeling as though the weight of his entire empire meant nothing in that moment. He touched Mateo's face, his expression melting from fury to relief as he felt the warmth of life still in his son's skin. "Papa," the boy whispered weakly, eyes fluttering open for just a second. Isabella watched, transfixed. She had expected rage, accusations, maybe even violence. Instead, she saw a man stripped bare of his armor, clutching his child as though nothing else mattered. The mafia boss was still there, in his commanding presence and the silent menace of his men, but beneath it was something undeniably human. Only when Mateo settled back into sleep did Luciano finally look at Isabella. His gaze was sharp, scrutinizing, as though peeling back her soul. "You," he began slowly, his voice low but weighted. "You saved him." Isabella swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She had no idea what his words meant, gratitude, suspicion, or a debt that would come with a dangerous price. But one thing was certain. Her life had just been forever tied to his. For a long moment, silence hung in Isabella's little home. Luciano De Luca's men stood at the doorway, their eyes sharp and unyielding, waiting for their boss's command. But Luciano himself was still kneeling beside his son, the mighty mafia leader reduced to nothing more than a desperate father. He brushed Mateo's damp hair back, his usually rigid expression softening into something almost tender. Isabella, standing a few feet away, felt like an intruder in a moment too raw to witness. Finally, Luciano rose to his full height, his presence filling the small room once more. His gaze landed on Isabella with an intensity that made her stomach twist. There was no mistaking the weight of his stare. It wasn't only gratitude, but calculation. A measuring of who she was and why she had stepped into a story that could have cost her everything. "You cared for him," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet touched with a rare sincerity, "while others would have left him to die." Isabella swallowed, clutching the folds of her dress nervously. "He's just a child," she murmured. "I couldn't leave him out there." Her words seemed to strike something in him. Luciano studied her, as though he hadn't expected such simple honesty. In his world, favors were currency, every action tangled in motives and debts. To hear that she had acted with nothing but compassion seemed almost foreign to him. "You don't understand," Luciano said finally, stepping closer. "You've saved more than his life. You've saved mine." His tone carried the weight of truth. Matteo was his only weakness, the light in his otherwise shadowed world. Losing him would have shattered him in ways no enemy ever could. Isabella's heart pounded, unsure how to react. Gratitude from a man like him was dangerous. She had heard the stories. Those who owed Luciano De Luca something were never forgotten. Neither were those whom he owed. Sure enough, his next words confirmed her fears. "From this day forward, you are under my protection. Whatever you need, you will have. Whoever dares to touch you will answer to me." His voice hardened with authority, and his men shifted as if acknowledging her new place under their boss's command. The words, though meant as a gift, felt like chains settling around Isabella's shoulders. Protection from a mafia boss was no small matter. It meant her life was no longer her own. Whether she wanted it or not, she was now connected to him, to his world, to his enemies. "Sir, that isn't necessary," she began, her voice trembling. "I didn't do this for anything in return." Luciano silenced her with a look. "I decide what's necessary." There was no anger in his tone, only certainty. Then, almost softer, he added, "You will not be forgotten, Isabella." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. As the men began making preparations to take Matteo home, Isabella realized with startling clarity her quiet, uneventful life was gone. By saving a child, she had entangled herself with the most dangerous man in the city, and though his gratitude might protect her, it would also change her destiny in ways she could never predict. The next days unfolded like a dream Isabella could not wake from. Her modest street, once filled with the chatter of children and the clatter of market carts, now carried whispers of her name. Neighbors looked at her differently, some with awe, others with fear, as men in black cars appeared occasionally, lingering like shadows to ensure she was safe. Luciano's promise of protection had not been empty. From that night on, she was no longer invisible. She was known, marked by her connection to the De Luca family. At first, Isabella tried to resume her quiet life. She returned to her teaching, her students laughing as if nothing had changed. Yet beneath the surface, everything had. When she walked home, she noticed watchful eyes at every corner, men who bowed their heads slightly in acknowledgement. No one dared to approach her rudely. No one dared to cross her. For the first time in her life, she felt both safe and trapped. One evening, as she prepared dinner, a knock sounded at her door, not the heavy, threatening knock of that first night, but a deliberate, respectful one. When she opened it, she found Luciano himself standing there, his son Matteo holding his hand. The boy's face was brighter now, color returned to his cheeks, and when he saw her, he broke into a wide smile. "Miss Isabella?" he cried, running forward to wrap his small arms around her waist. Isabella's heart softened instantly. She knelt and hugged him back, feeling the warmth of his gratitude, so innocent compared to the weight carried by his father. Luciano watched in silence for a long moment before stepping inside. He didn't need to say much, his presence spoke volumes, but eventually his deep voice broke the silence. "He wouldn't rest until I brought him to see you," he admitted, his usual authority tempered by something gentler. As Isabella guided Matteo to sit, Luciano's gaze remained fixed on her. "You've changed his life," he said quietly. "And mine. In my world, trust is rare. Loyalty even rarer. You gave both without asking for anything." Isabella hesitated, meeting his eyes. "I only did what anyone should have done." A faint, almost incredulous smile touched his lips. "No," he said firmly. "Not anyone. Only you." That night, as father and son left her home, Isabella felt the weight of an unspoken truth settle over her. She had stepped into Luciano's life by accident, but fate had tied their paths together. She wasn't just a schoolteacher anymore. She was the woman who had carried the mafia boss's son to safety, the woman Luciano De Luca owed a debt to, a debt he would never forget. And though her days might still look ordinary on the surface, Isabella knew deep down that her destiny had shifted. The shadows of the mafia now touched her life, but within those shadows glimmered a strange, undeniable light, an unbreakable bond, and perhaps the beginning of something neither she nor Luciano could have ever expected. Her act of compassion had not only saved a child, it had rewritten her future.